morning.
Or something in the morning?
Say that again?
Are you really awake at 4 something in the morning?
No, actually 3.
Did you go to bed or have you just been up?
Just an early rise. Yeah.
You're insane.
Quick nap.
You seem a bit tired as well, Simon. You was rubbing your eye. Have you been an early start for you today?
Very early.
We thought if anyone was going to get us up at 3 a.m., Simon Sinek's our man.
You really should get better friends.
How's everything going in your world?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, we're adjusting to a new normal. I think we're all coming to terms with the fact that this is going to be many, many weeks. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for reinvention. Nothing drives innovation like a crisis.
Yeah. So you released Finite and Infinite games recently, and I guess in that you couldn't foresee what was coming, but it just seems like it's one of the most important books right now with the messages about how businesses and people and families and countries and the species as a whole approaches what's happening with the disease. So what is a finite and infinite game in the context of what we're going through right now?
So a philosopher by the name of James Carse in the 1980s articulated these 2 types of games, finite games and infinite games. Finite game is known players, fixed rules, and agreed upon objective. There's always a beginning, middle, and end. And if there's a winner, there has to be a loser. An infinite game is known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is to stay in the game as long as possible to perpetuate the game. There's no such thing as winning in an infinite game. And life is an infinite game. We're not going to win this. We'll get through it. But viruses and diseases and bacteria, they don't go away. And the virus isn't competing against us. The virus doesn't care about us. The virus, like any living organism, is just trying to survive and live as long as it can. So there's no winning this. And so we have to adopt an infinite mindset. An easy way to think about it is our average lifespan is in the 70s or 80s, right? For most people. And so most people will go through something like this once in their life. Our grandparents lived through the war, and we're living through this. But imagine if we lived for 1,000 years. If our lives lasted 1,000 years, then this would be like the 7th one we've had of this, and we would think about life a lot differently, and we would be prepared differently because we know that this is coming. And the problem is we don't know when. And this is the big thing about the infinite game versus the finite game. Most people and organizations prefer to play in the finite game, quite frankly, because it's easier. It's shorter term, it's easier to count, it's predictable, and we falsely believe we can apply the rules of the finite game in an infinite context, which we cannot. You can't win global politics, you can't win life, you're not declared the winner of careers, but we act as if we can. We say we're number one, we're the best. It's impossible. So I think this is a big reminder to us just how much we do not play with an infinite mindset in the game of life and how ill-prepared we are. And especially in the West, where we have so much hubris, where we think we're so special and we're so advanced, and the West is the least prepared of the world, reacting the most poorly. And I think it's a big lesson for us in the West that we're not better than the rest of the world. We're just one of the group of countries in the world, and at the end of the day, we have no control over things like this. And the only way to get through it is with an infinite mindset and to work together. It is the only way. Like, we have to get through this together. And all the things that many of us are suffering, if you live alone and you're hunkered down right now, it's going to get lonely. And human contact is really, really important to social animals. we consider solitary confinement a form of torture, because removing human beings away from social animals can lead us to madness. And so I think this underscores the importance of human relationships, real human relationships, being in the company of our friends, holding hands, hugging, looking each other in the eye, hearing each other's voices. And no text message or social media or number of likes can ever replace that. And if this is not the biggest reminder of the value of human relationships, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
I believe we will come out of this better because of it.
Good.
I absolutely believe we'll come out of this better because of it. Many of the things that we're figuring out to get through this will survive. Like dinner parties. We're having online dinner parties. I think there's going to be more real dinner parties. We're having more phone call conversations as opposed to texting conversations. I think that will continue. At least I really hope it does.
That's so good. Yeah, I'm keen to get to some of that, some of the positive stuff and some of the solutions out the other side. But maybe we'll start with the negative or the bit of bleakness. I guess, what's the worst case scenario in your mind if people do become very reactive and do get sucked into the finite game in this moment, rather than maintaining some of the infinite mindset, and they get sucked into maybe overreactions? Or what's the worst case scenario here?
Well, the medical experts have advised us that overreacting is fine. If you're staying at home and wiping everything down and you're paranoid about every box that's being delivered to your house, good is what they're telling us.
Yeah, more from business
I think the other problem is thinking we got this beat, and because we see remember, these things are unpredictable, and they don't follow predictable timelines, and so the worst is still to come. And we see that China got hit very hard, reacted very strictly, and overcame it reasonably quickly. And now you have much smaller countries like Italy and Spain. Remember, China has over 1 billion people. Italy and Spain are tiny, and yet their death tolls are higher than China now. As a percentage of population, this is horrific. And my fear is that if we're blasé about it, then bigger nations like the United States are going to suffer horrific casualties, because we think that we can beat it, or worse, that we put economics ahead of human life, which is the same as a company putting profit ahead of people. Putting economics ahead of human life is the economy will recover. Dead people won't.
Yeah. There's a lot of businesses right now that are under a lot of financial pressure.
Sure.
And we might have, maybe the GFC was somewhat analogous to what we're going through now. And maybe we have in our lifetime, and some business leaders now have seen something slightly similar. So there might be something to learn from the past. But if there is anything to learn from the past, with the business pressures and the need to, in the book, you talk about resources versus will, and people are so low on resources right now. What can they learn, and how can they act right now to, I guess, take care of the human impact if they do need to cut resources?
So there's no question that reality is that there are many businesses that will fail. They will go bankrupt. But this is not unprecedented. Let's be clear. It might be expedited, it might be sudden, but it's not unprecedented. The internet put a lot of companies out of business because it was an entirely new way of which we had to live our lives and how businesses functioned. And you can look at any new technology, put old technology out of business. Every video stores don't exist anymore. There were some of them who were thriving, and yet they are all bankrupt because we have streaming. We don't go to the video store anymore, right? So this is not unprecedented. The ones who will survive are the ones that don't try and double down on their old business models, but attempt to reinvent their business models. We've seen this in publishing, we've seen this in television, we've seen this in music, where old-fashioned industries in times of change double down on their old business models? Like, why is it that Amazon invented itself and the digital reader and not the publishing industry? Why is it that an upstart company called Netflix invented itself and not the movie and television industry? Why is it that a computer company invented iTunes and not the music industry? It's because they all doubled down on their old business models in the times of extreme change. And so I think now, for the companies that have invested in their people for a period of time, the will of those people is high, and the will of those people is not survival, but reinvention. It's the companies that have been playing with a finite mindset for too long that everybody's in survival mode and doubling down on old business models. But it's the companies that have been playing with a finite mindset, the ones where the people are scared but motivated, they're inspired, they're taking care of each other, that they see this as a crisis, of course, but they see this as an amazing opportunity for reinvention. So take a restaurant, for example. I know a fine dining restaurant in New York City. It's only been open for 9 months. It's a fantastic restaurant. He should go out of business, but he's not, because he's figured out a way that he can deliver his food to people and keep all his staff. Right? Now, he never did deliveries. He's a fine dining restaurant. Fine dining restaurants don't deliver food. They do now. Right? And he, instead of hunkering down and trying to figure out how to get people to come to the restaurant, which is now illegal, he's found ways that he can take food to people. And I think there's an amazing opportunity for companies. That's just a small, silly example. But there's companies that have amazing opportunities to not look at their businesses and say, how can we continue to sell the thing that we've got? But rather, how can we deliver our message, our cause, advance our cause in this new world? It's a different kind of challenge. It's a different kind of challenge.
With all that's going on, we're seeing a lot of companies making a lot of moves. Understandably, everyone has to do something. What are some of the things that companies can do in the short term that don't necessarily impact the long term? So one example, both of us have got someone close to us has been cut by 20% less work, one day a week. Everyone in the company gets 20% less, as opposed to getting rid of 20% of the people.
Right.
What are some of those moves that people can do, and what are the longer term impacts when, thinking through the infinite mindset? What impacts do these short term moves have?
Yeah, I mean, I really respect that. It's better we should all suffer a little than any of us have to suffer a lot. And granted, it's impossible to maintain that forever, but if you can hold on to that for as long as possible until we get through this, I think that's wonderful. And what ends up happening is morale goes up. Because one of the things I'm learning is more than just money, which of course is important for us to survive. But again, we can figure our way through that. Landlords will suffer and not get paid for a while. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we'll get through it, but people need their jobs just to do something, to get through the day. I found that's one of the things that people who are getting laid off. Yes, they're upset about the loss of money, but they're also upset with the fact that they lost their team and they just lost something to do. And I think we have to remember that there's more than just money. There's camaraderie, and there's just using up our time. And I think to involve people, to give our people a challenge, let them work together, that management doesn't have to come up with all the solutions, that we should invite our people to help us figure out, not just quote unquote how to make money, but how are we going to reinvent ourselves? What can we do? How can we work together? Who wants to volunteer? And there's something to be said for that. And that goes for individuals, for freelancers as well. One of the things that I'm seeing that is so amazing is freelancer communities are coming together to figure it out, how they can work together to do something. If we focus only on the now, we're going to hide under our tables, and we're going to worry. And don't get me wrong, I have my moments too. Like, I have my every cough, sneeze, and sore throat that I have, I'm taking my temperature and think this is it, but whenever possible, it's the future that matters. We will get through this. It will end. It cannot last forever. The question is how much life will it take before it ends? Whether it ends naturally, or whether we come up with a vaccine, or whether we control it with isolation, or whether it kills so many people it goes away. the question is, how do we get through this with as minimal damage to human life as possible? But it will end. My grandmother lived through the Blitz. And I think stories like hers, as we grew up, she would tell us the stories of, she'd go to, and they went to work every day. As she'd go to work one morning and the building that was there the day before wasn't there now. 36,000 people lost their lives in London. 82,000 were seriously injured in 11 weeks of bombing during the Blitz, right? My point is they got through it. And it wasn't easy, it was hard, but they worked together and they figured it out and it ended. And the question is, how do we end this with as minimal life and as minimal damage as possible, while also recognizing that life will not be the same after this. It will be different.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like in my lifetime, maybe yours as well, Simon, I'm not sure, but I just feel like I haven't lived through a huge world event. And in a perverse kind of way, I don't mind the idea of being someone who's actually done that. And, us generations, we're millennials, we do get attacked sometimes of being a bit soft. Soft might not be the right word, but expecting everything to be handed to us on a platter in that sense. And maybe we will learn some more resilience. I'm not sure what it is, but learn something from adversity. What do you think?
I don't think it's unique to the generation. I think we all got soft. We all started to believe that, global meltdowns no longer happen and world wars no longer happen and economies stay good forever. And it just reinforces a finite mindset. And I think you're right. There's, in a perverse way, there's a gratitude that every generation is tested, and this is our test. And I think you're right. I think this is like we talked about before. I think this is a huge wake-up call for the West. That this finite mindset is just not. It doesn't make us stronger, better prepared. And I think for young people, but all people, but particularly young people, that there's more to life than making the most money, becoming a billionaire, finding the best job, being number one, thinking that you have to have the perfect job straight out of school, otherwise your life is wasted. This is a journey, and this is one of the events on our journey, and I think it's a reminder that the relationships we build and our ability to serve those we care about, our ability to live a life with a servant heart, a giver's heart, rather than a taker's heart, is just a better way to live. And when we face crisis, that we're surrounded by people who love us.
Yeah, love it. I've got a friend. She works at a bank, and she manages a team. And one of the things she says she struggles with, and this is probably all leaders around the world. We're all looking for certainty. I'm looking for certainty. When the prime minister or president steps on the stage, you're like, just tell us what to do. Just give me some certainty. Everyone's screaming out for it. But my friend who works in the bank and manages people, she's like, I know everyone wants that, but so she's finding it hard to, is vulnerability the right cue, or is putting that strong certainty kind of facade on the right way to go?
Well, if you preach certainty in a time of uncertainty, you're telling lies.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. Here's a fact. We don't know. We have best guesses. That's all. The medical experts are making best guesses. That's all. Based on their understanding of other viruses and how things spread and how pandemics work and how the human immune system works and how contagions work. they are better qualified to make a best guess than somebody with no qualifications whatsoever, right? But it's all a best guess. And I think leaders, there's a difference between positivity and optimism. Positivity is everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. That's positivity. Optimism is everything's gonna be fine. That is a fact. Everything's fine, not a fact. Kind of, it's actually misleading and potentially dangerous. But everything's gonna be fine is 100% true. And it's gonna hurt for now is true. And what we have to do is figure out ways to work together because we have to get through this together is true. And so what good leadership does is it doesn't pretend that the tunnel is lit up, but it points squarely to the light at the end of the tunnel, which we know is coming. We just don't know how far away it is. And we're going to have to go through the darkness of the tunnel until we get there. And the only thing we can do is keep moving forwards.
I like that.
So good leaders have to be optimistic, but positivity is a lie.
That's a cool analogy. It's not just lying and saying the tunnel's all lit up. It's just pointing to the light at the end of the tunnel. I like that. I like that a lot. I think one other big lesson out of this is that it's obviously a bit late now, but that we need to be prepared for times like this. There's going to be something. It might not be a global virus pandemic, but it could be the GFC. It could be the dot-com boom and bust. It could be 9/11. There's going to be something at some point in the next decade. Something else is going to happen as well. And I think in the good times, we need to prepare ourselves for the bad times. So there was a quote from Nassim Taleb a couple of days ago where he said, "Explain to me why we should spend taxpayer money to bail out companies," in parentheses, airlines, who spent their cash buying their own stock instead of having a crisis buffer. So I think it's the idea that we need to be prepared. You had a good story about Victorinox that had cash reserves when the times were good. They were saving because they knew something bad was happening. I think that's an important lesson for companies and for individuals. It's
true for individuals as well. We spend all the money we've got as opposed to saving money just in case. It's why we have insurance. We don't expect our house to burn down. We don't want our house to burn down, but we have insurance, just in case the house burns down. And in many places, it's the law to have insurance. It makes you wonder, in Australia, you have this wonderful provision where it's the law to vote, which I love. But maybe it should be the law to save. Maybe we should be required to put at least X% of our paychecks aside for times like this, because then it reduces the burden on government and each other later on. And by the way, I think that goes for companies as well. And one of the problems with so many of these industries is they're considered essential industries and they're too big to fail. This is what we saw in 2008. There were companies that were too big to fail. We couldn't let them fail even though they deserved it. They deserved to fail because they built bad companies, ill-prepared. And you're absolutely right. Airlines are not the only one. There are other companies too that stock buybacks are not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is they overdo it. They over-index and do it too much in the name of self-profit. And they leave their companies unbelievably vulnerable to stuff like this. Where's the company that stands up and says, we've got a $2 billion reserve, we can weather this for about a year, we're good? And that's because we know why, because they succumb to the pressure from shareholders to say, how can you keep $2 billion in reserve? That's our money. Well, look at the stock market. All of those same people who put the same pressure on all of these companies, they've lost 30% of their wealth because of this nonsense, because of the nonsense of before. The excessive pressure they put on companies to think short term. Guess who's paying the price? Shareholders. The irony is thick. But I fear that we won't learn our lesson. We in the West we have short memories. I lived in New York City during September 11th, and I'll tell you, that city was unbelievable after September 11th. There was no crime. Crime disappeared. And everybody was nice to each other. This is a city with 8 million people. It was like utopia. People were concerned about each other and cooperative. And, well, that went away. So, this is where good leadership comes in. We need good leadership in politics. We need good leadership in our businesses. We need good leadership in our communities. We need good leadership in our families. We need good leadership in our churches. We need good leadership everywhere. And right now we have a crisis of leadership in the world. We have very little good leaders in the world, very few good leaders in the world, people who preach a vision, who offer us a just cause and prepare for all eventualities, and we're inspired to do so. But unfortunately, we keep placing leaders in positions of power who encourage us to think short term. And I do believe, I have an optimistic view of this. I really hope a lot of people, especially your generation, are profoundly moved by this experience. Remember, our grandparents were really frugal. That's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's because they lived during the Depression and the war. And so it affected their worldview for the rest of their lives. So for a young generation, especially Gen Z, that's coming of age in this crisis, it's absolutely going to affect them for the rest of their lives. And I hope for the better. I hope your generation comes through with as better planners, better savers, and more concerned about genuine human interaction and deep, meaningful relationships. And I hope we never have to go through something like this again. But if we do, we'll be prepared.
Absolutely. I love it. It's still quite early days, but do you have any, have you seen any signs of leadership you like that's great? And, or the flip side of that, is there any leadership that you're seeing that isn't perhaps going to give us the best outcomes?
Well, I'm in California, and I'm proud of the fact that Governor Newsom was ahead of the curve. California went into lockdown over a week ago, where other places are just doing it today or haven't done it yet. And so in a nation that's behind the curve, I'm in a state where we're ahead of the curve. And as long as people follow the rules, it'll have a positive effect. I saw some comments by Governor Cuomo from New York yesterday or 2 days ago, and he was so honest and yet still had a tone of optimism, and said that New York is hit hard, not because anything's bad about New York. It's because of population density and because there's so much international travel. It happened there first, it was her, and he's saying, take lessons from New York, things we've done right and things we've done wrong. He was thinking about the benefits that New York could offer everybody else, because we could see what happens. So I've been pretty inspired by those two governors, mainly because I spend a lot of time in New York and California, and so I've been paying attention to their words. Yeah.
I was wondering if there was anyone you want to call out for bad, but we'll let you off the hook on that one. One thing I was thinking is
too many others. How's that?
For sure, of course.
Any leader that thought that if they stuck their head in the sand, it would go away, which unfortunately, whoever anybody's thinking of in their mind, it's not that just that person. Yeah. I got a list.
Yeah, for sure. I think this coronavirus is like a finite game within the infinite game of our lives, and then our species. There's a bit of a finite game. We want to win, obviously, we want to beat it, but then
no, there is no finite game. This is a moment in the journey.
I like it.
There's no such thing as beating viruses. We'll overcome the challenge of this one.
Fantastic.
But it's not going to go away. That doesn't mean the elimination of all viruses. The next one could be Ebola. If you stay at home now, you're fine. Like I'm at home, I'm touching my face, like my house is clean. And even if somebody gets it, though the death rates are higher than the normal flu, most people will be okay. Now imagine if it were Ebola, where like most people die. Like there's no winning. This is just a bump in the journey. That's what we have to get over. We have to get over this idea of thinking in terms of winning and losing. It's like you go to school, you have good grades and bad grades. They're just blips on the journey of school. You haven't won school because you got an A, and you didn't lose school because you got a D.
That's great.
We want to get ahead. Without a doubt, we want to be ahead. But we don't win this. We get through it. There's a difference.
I like it. Well, my question was going to be, how do we snap out of that finite mindset and back to that? Oh, yeah, okay. My question was going to be, how do you snap out of that finite mindset and back to the infinite mindset, which I think you did a pretty good job there of, because I think a lot of people it's easy. This thing is like forcing us back to finite, but it's vital that we snap back to the infinite thinking.
Yeah. Again, think of days as ahead and behind rather than winning and losing. Think of these things as moments on the journey, struggles along the journey, but there's no winning and losing. There is no winning and losing in an infinite game. And the game of life is an infinite game. We don't get through this and win the game of life. We're trying to mitigate the damage. That's what we're trying to do. Not win, just mitigate the damage. It will end. The question is, how much damage will it do before it ends? And if we do nothing, if we make no reaction, it'll do a huge amount of damage. If we do something, it'll do less damage. There's no getting away from the damage. The question is how much damage. That's within our control.
Love it. Being a podcast that talks about books, Simon, we go through the best bits of the best books each week. What's some of your favorite books that you've read and things you can recommend for our listeners? And obviously, that was a pretty abrupt jump away from the previous discussion we've had.
I think essential reading for every human being on the planet is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think if you're in business, you have to read it. I think if you're an entrepreneur, you have to read it. I think if you're a human being, you have to read it. I think that's an essential book.
It gives so much. I mean, if we just compare ourselves wherever we are or whatever we're going through now or whatever you go through in life, and you just, as soon as you compare it to what Viktor Frankl did and how he handled it, and then, I mean, there's nothing that really compares, and it just kind of snaps you back into reality and probably a state of gratitude. So
one of his lessons was, we cannot control the circumstances around us. All we can control is our attitude.
I think that's vital for right now. With the time we're in now, obviously the thinking of the infinite game versus the finite game is vitally important. The thinking of that, what can you control? Well, you can control your own attitude and your own outlook. They're two vital things. Is there any other things? It could be a book, it could be something else, or any ways of thinking, any other ways that you filter all this information through? What other small, simple ideas do you think are absolutely vital for people to be approaching this time with?
Try and call people. If you're feeling lonely, call someone and say, I'm feeling lonely. If somebody's living alone and you're worried about them, then pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, how you doing? I was thinking about you. It's an amazingly powerful thing when somebody says, I'm thinking about you. Yes, we're texting plenty and texting is fine, but, pick up the phone, get on a Zoom call or a WhatsApp video or something, have lunch, have coffee, have dinner with each other. I did this last night. I laid out my dinner and my friend laid out her dinner and we had dinner together. In person is obviously better, and looking somebody in the eye physically is better than on a screen. But just to hear a human voice, it's way more powerful than people realize. So, to be a leader right now means to have empathy and think of others as human beings. And when possible, just give them a call. We live in a world where phone calls are basically free. I remember growing up, we used to call my grandparents in the UK, and it would be like, 25 cents a minute or more, 50 cents a minute. We'd time it. We'd have timers, how long we could be on the phone because it got so expensive. You can call anywhere in the world for free. So do that.
Love it. So wrapping it up now, coming toward the end now, where can people find you and learn more about your books and your other upcoming projects, Simon?
All the usual places.
Google.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, all the usual suspects.
I probably should realize it's not some people it's worth asking the question. Then I forgot.
I didn't mean to be flip about it, but I think I think everyone is on Instagram,
that's
Facebook,
right.
Twitter. Like, it's not unique to me,
Yeah.
I don't think it's any indication of where somebody is in their life or their career because they have a Facebook page or an Instagram. It's like,
Too good. What's your next project? What are you working on now that this has all come? And obviously you went to come to Australia. Obviously that's not happening. And anything else that's happening around the world? I'm sure a few things that you had in the pipeline for 2020 are now on the back burner.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am coming to Australia. The question is just later.
Yeah,
just not now. Yeah, I mean, I had my mindset tour that was going, and we planned on expanding it. It was just a test to see if it worked, and it's been great. So once we're back to normal, I'll boost that up again. And we're looking for ways, in the spirit of reinvention, we're looking for ways that we can do something similar in an online forum. Many of the plans that we were developing, we are continuing to develop. We want to do more why discoveries for people, especially now. I think people want to know their purpose and have the time to figure it out. So we're in the next month or two, we've accelerated all of our plans for how we can bring this to life, given all the circumstances.
Fantastic. Simon, thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it. We hope to see you when you're in Australia, whenever that may be.
I look forward to it. It'll be next year. I'll be there next year. And I look forward to meeting you in person. Thanks so much for getting up early and taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, Simon. It's been an honor to get to chat to you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks so much.